authorities and civil society engaged in the complex and long-term process of fostering integration and mutual trust. To this end, over the next 6 years, the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund will make available more than €3 billion to member states. The EU's financial aid does not stop here. For the 2014 to 2020 period, at least 20% of the European Social Fund resources, that is, at least €16 billion, will be channeled to actions that promote social inclusion, including measures for the integration of migrants with a particular focus on those seeking asylum and refugees, as well as on children. The funds can support targeted initiatives to improve language and professional skills, improve access to services, promote access to the labour market, inclusive education, fostering intercultural exchanges, and promoting awareness campaigns targeting both host communities and migrants. Ladies and gentlemen, we must not forget an important additional challenge that we're facing inside Europe. We need to change the perception of public opinion on migration. Our biggest concern is the rise of racism and xenophobia, fueled by populist movements across Europe. In this respect, civil society organizations can and do play a major part in promoting positive messages on migration. I wish on this point to commend Kisa and all those that are part of this EU-funded Integro project, which showcases that we need to cooperate on integration, to exchange best practices, but most importantly, to actually implement actions geared towards the integration of migrants. Last but not least, let me emphasize that the European Commission is determined to build on and further develop coherent, comprehensive and effective policies that will allow all European citizens and all migrants of all our origins and community to find their place and have a bright future in our society. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello. Mr. Markopoulioutis, thank you very much for your address. Just one very brief comment. It's all very nice. It sounds very nice in theory, and the European Union is supposed to be doing not what we fear, what we are concerned with. That integration policies are an important part of the European migrant strategy, as Mr. Markopoulioutis has told us. However, the strategy with its focus on restrictive and measures and border control, etc., do not seem very much, to my mind at least, to coincide or to be in accordance with what integration is all about. But in order to have another view, and for helping us all to actually do set the scene, we have Miss, I have got a name, Odrego Vivian Wobuzo, INA representative. Thank you very much, Nubugo.
Thank you. It's not an easy name to pronounce. Thank you very much for inviting INA to be here and to discuss some of the successes of the Integro project. I'm a shadow report officer from INA and... microphone.
Should be on now.
Is it on? Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, as I was saying, I'm the INA shadow report officer at INA, the European Network Against Racism. And INA was invited to participate in this event, essentially because in one way or another, we've been involved in the Integro project really from the start. And just to quickly explain who ENR is, I wonder if there's an easier way to do this. So ENR is essentially our vision is for full equality, solidarity, and well-being for all. We work to combat racism and discrimination. And we're a network that started in 1998. And essentially, we're there to interact with EU institutions and give a European dimension to the fight against racism. And so, as I was saying, we are a network of anti-racism organizations, and we work across Europe. We have members in 27 EU member states, but also members in Croatia and Iceland. And our members are essentially grassroots organizations fighting against racism. We have members who are information centers, advocacy organizations, any type of organization essentially that's working to fight against racism. And we work at an EU level. We're a secretariat that's based in Brussels. Essentially, most of our work is to influence the European political agenda. We monitor EU policy developments, lobbying, advocacy. We meet with key EU officials and institutions, etc. And one area that we've been working on for a while is integration. And it started, I think, in 2008 with one of our projects. And what we realized was that there was no unique concept of integration in terms of the EU approach. There's the Europe 2020, which is a socio-economic orientation. It looks at disadvantaged people. There's a Stockholm programme, which is more of a legal orientation, and primarily is focused on legally residing third country nationals. But with both of those two programs, they do miss important groups. The first one misses active immigrants with high potential. And the second program misses second and third generation migrants, undocumented immigrants, national ethnic minorities such as Roma and Sinti. And basically, we came to an approach that integration is dynamic. It's a two-way process of mutual accommodation by all immigrants and all residents of the EU. And we took the EU Common Basic Principles on integration as our starting point for our work in 2008. And knowing that there are linkages between anti-discrimination and migration and integration and social cohesion. But we advocated for more than just these basic principles. We wanted better tools to kind of foster development and integration from the EU. And essentially, our work started with MRIP. MRIP in 2008 was a project to produce a new evidence-based positive rhetoric on migration and integration, and it finished in 2011. And as much of our projects are, it was a partnership between the ENR Secretariat and ENR members. We worked in 6 countries: Belgium, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Italy, Sweden, and the UK. And our objective was to identify projects taking place in those countries which would be amenable to a peer review and which would cast some light on the way integration would be addressed, good ways to be addressed. And we wanted to include groups who would bring a range of experiences under the project purposes and also a range of key stakeholders. The migration background of the countries that we worked with, obviously they were some with relatively new experiences of migration, including Cyprus. Also, those with a long history of migration, or I mean, all countries have a long history of migration, but Belgium and the UK have a longer history of kind of working with integration programs. And each of those countries looked at different areas. Two looked at employment, civil engagement, media images, and access to family welfare services. And for all of those projects, the target group was third country nationals residing in the EU, legally residing in the EU. And there was a whole range of policy areas that the project looked at, from labour market to education to political participation. In fact, actually, I brought some copies of the project work that we did, and I think they're at the back somewhere. So if you want to find out more about the details of the project, please pick up one of the project reports and the toolkit, or look on the website as well. But also, for each project, we looked at how the common basic principles of integration were mainstreamed into good practice, and how partners stimulated stakeholders' engagement in policy making. And what was really also very important was making migrant concerns visible. So how were migrants involved in the policy making, and what change did that bring to the integration challenges of that group? As I said before, we built on those common basic principles of integration, and we came up with some more that would really look at framing a positive narrative on migration and integration. They're all listed there, but they're essentially 8 areas that were important to us. And we also came up with some really interesting ideas about what a good migration and integration project would look like for civil society organizations. And so Integra and the ENAR toolkit that we produced, there are 2 common points, which is the promotion of a multi-stakeholder approach to integration, the engagement and participation of affected migrant communities in the integration process. Oh God, I'm getting on. And actually, I've got a slide here on the national projects, but I won't go into that because I think everyone's talking about that later on. So just to say that, thank you, that Austria, Czech Republic, Cyprus, Germany, and Northern Ireland are the national projects. Thank you. And I've just got a couple of slides on the new EU agenda on migration and the challenges of integration. Our colleague who has, I don't know, has he left? Is he still here? He's left. Oh, that's a shame. Because it was very interesting, his presentation, and essentially it was an outline of the agenda that was presented, but obviously we have a different take on it. We look at it slightly differently, and I wanted to ask him a few questions. But anyway, in recent months, we've seen a lot of high-profile discussions at an EU level on migration, and the European Commission published its agenda on migration, which is really a broad outline on future objectives. The detail is not really there yet. I think there will be another more detailed plan coming out either today or by the end of the week. And there are going to be 3 phases of this agenda, and in early 2016, there will be more trafficking measures and long-term plan for resettlement and relocation. And there will be a Dublin review and a Schengen revision and smart borders package. As was explained earlier on, there are 4 pillars to manage migration better. I mean, they are as he outlined earlier on. I mean, I've put the first one, fight against irregular migration, because it's actually written like that in the actual agenda, which I kind of find a little bit shocking, but that's one of the first pillars, is this fight against irregular migration. Second pillar is securing Europe's external borders, a strong common asylum policy, and the 4th one is an EU policy on legal migration. There is not much written in that agenda about integration. I think it has 1 paragraph. So it's really about how the EU plans to manage migration, and not really do very much on integration. But so we have 6 current challenges in terms of this EU agenda and integration. So the first one that we've identified is border management actions. We are concerned that some of these may lead to discriminatory practices, such as profiling. How are people going to to stop and check once people are in the EU. This idea of fingerprinting, who are they going to fingerprint? Is it everyone? Is it some people? Fundamental rights of detained asylum seekers and third country nationals are secured. We really need to make sure that this happens. I'm not sure, given the agenda as it's written now, that's clear. Only 20% of the overall budget will be invested on integration measures. Nothing mentioned on the combat against xenophobia or promotion of diversity. The burden of relocation and resettlement is on asylum seekers and refugees. What we talked about earlier on as well about this two-way process of integration, it doesn't seem to be there's a two-way process at all. It's really about stopping migration flows more than anything. But serious implementation of the Return Directive, Employer Sanction Directive, Facilitation Directive, management of third country nationals' return. That's essentially what the agenda is about. And there is a new model of legal migration, but it's based on the blue card, which essentially, from when I read the agenda, it's looking at how to assess how it's done and improve it slightly. So I don't know if it's a new model. It's saying it's going to assess it and hopefully have a new model, but we don't really know what that model looks like yet. Basically for us at ENAR, our next steps are really just to look into the detail of the plans and to work with our members to identify the gaps and the potential implementation concerns. And that's where I'll leave it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ogoza. I'm so sorry. Now, we don't have any provision on the agenda now for discussion. We will have later on. We now have the presentation of the project, of the pilot integration projects. Okay, can I ask Patrick and Adriana? Okay. Mark? Hello, Mark. Will you present the... Okay.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Mark Caffrey, and I'm from NICEM, the Northern Ireland Council for Ethnic Minorities. So this morning I'm just going to take you through the context and then the delivery of our implementation project as part of the Integro program. So NICEM is an NGO, a non-government organisation, and it was established in 1994 as a response to the lack of legislation to protect on the grounds of racial discrimination in Northern Ireland. So working with grassroots organisations, we were successfully campaigned to have race relations legislation adopted in Northern Ireland as the Race Relations Order in 1997. NICEM has grown since then over the last 20 years, and we now have 28 Black and minority ethnic-led membership organisations, and they are the real grassroots community members that we work with on all of our projects. So our work would combine action research with community development and policy engagement at both a local, national, European and international level. Since 2012, we've been able to expand the remit of NICEM's work to include regional work in more rural areas. Previously, we've been based in Belfast, but now we have been able to establish offices in the northwest, so NICEM Northwest, and also in the Mid Ulster and Down area. So it means that we can expand on leadership opportunities for Black and minority ethnic community members, but also develop an increasing evidence base to help us lobby at a government level. So the aims of the NICEM Integro project, we ended up with two aims, and I'll return to these later after giving some context. The first aim is to raise awareness with statutory and non-statutory organisations the institutional barriers to the full participation in the labour market experienced by third country nationals. And the second aim is to raise awareness with employers and employer bodies of workplace discrimination experienced by migrant workers. Since NICEM started in 1994, there's been a massive change in the migrant population in Northern Ireland. Our most recent census was in 2011, and it found that the total resident population of Northern Ireland stood at just over 1.8 million residents. About 4.5 of those residents were born outside of the UK or the Republic of Ireland, and that represents an increase of 199% of the population born outside of the UK and Republic of Ireland since 2001. So currently our migrant profile is about 11% of the Northern Ireland population, and that represents a 2% increase overall from 2001. In general, the population increase has been driven by the accession of the 12 EU accession countries, and as a result of that, our largest migrant populations at the moment are from the Polish community and from the Lithuanian community. The third country national population is considerably lower. It represents about 1% of that at 25,820 individuals, and the largest populations come from India, from the Philippines, and from China. The Integra work happens in a context where policy at a national level hasn't developed to meet the needs of an increased migrant worker community. But our pilot project has been informed by a review of Northern Ireland policy and strategy documents. So NICEM have conducted a number of action research reports that look at migration at a local level, and also try to tie it to national policy lobbying. At the moment, we have no racial equality strategy in Northern Ireland, and in fact we have no equality strategies implemented there, so we don't have any policy framework to have this work sit within, but a lot of our activities have been generated towards providing an evidence base for future strategy development. So there currently are no specific strategic objectives to deliver the obligation of Northern Ireland's Executive Assembly to protect and fulfil the rights of black and minority ethnic community members. There's also no attempt to address multiple discrimination or to encourage strategic, interdepartmental and time-bound planning to support migrant workers at a strategic level. And looking towards the wider context, the UK Social Integration Commission completed a piece of work in early 2014 with a focus on social grade, ethnicity and age. But although it was termed as a nationwide document, it did not focus on Northern Ireland at all. So we really were starting from scratch when we developed our implementation project. The most recent research that looked specifically at black and minority ethnic workers and with the employment barriers that they may face was a piece of work by Joseph Rowntree Foundation in 2011. The report was entitled Economic and Social Mobility of Black and Minority Ethnic Individuals in Northern Ireland. And it identified, and NICEM would agree with this, that black and minority ethnic workers are at a particular risk of in-work poverty, and that government policy and action are the largest influences on the rate of poverty. NICEM, as I said, develops a lot of our work through grassroots engagement and empowering ethnic minority leaders. So over the last few years, we've developed a strong evidence base that is region-specific, and it has been able to progress grassroots issues to the European and international policy level. So, for example, we've worked at a regional level to build an evidence base that provided a shadow report to the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and that was in 2013. We've also developed some specific research in the Northwest about the impact of the economic downturn on migrant communities, and also the differential childcare needs of families with children from ethnic minority backgrounds. So all of these works provide a significant evidence base that we can draw on to inform the Integro project from the outset, and it helps us to integrate it within our work and also identify cross-cutting themes that impact on the employment and employability of third country nationals. So the first phase of the project then was to map the integration reality. As I said, we didn't have an existing integration strategy. We didn't have any existing integration research. That led us to develop the Voices for Change report, and you can find some small postcards down the back that are the culmination of that report. All of this work with Integro, we developed it in mind with the fact that there is a draft document of the racial equality strategy that is supposed to extend over 10 years from 2014 to 2024. That document still hasn't transpired. We've over the last year, we've been lobbying very hard and supporting ethnic minority individuals and community groups, as well as wider civil society, to submit responses to the consultation document, but it will be 1 year on in June, and we've still yet to see a draft document. For the Integro project, we focused on 4 key integration indicators: employment, education, active citizenship, social inclusion, and then we had a wider section on welcome in society. We gained our initial responses to inform this project through online questionnaire and focus groups. So overall, we achieved 650 responses. 48 of those responses were from third country nationals, which is reflective of the smaller population size that I indicated earlier. But we worked to make sure that third country national voice was included very strongly from the outset by making sure that focus groups that we carried out across Northern Ireland had a very strong third country national representation, and we ended up having a total of 72 participants in those groups. Very early on, and across Northern Ireland, employment emerged as the key theme of our integration project. The main concerns that third country national community members had is that their potential was being lost. They were coming to Northern Ireland very highly skilled, and their skills were being underutilised. It was frustrating, it was demotivating, and over a period of time their skills were being lost. So we effectively had a very strong migrant workforce population that were being de-skilled by moving to Northern Ireland over time. We identified an urgent need to address the dearth and inequality of affordable and accessible English language tuition, with a particular focus on technical and vocational English courses. And we needed to address fear and intimidation at work, discrimination, a lack of employment rights, and poor and unsafe working conditions. So we were able to distill this in designing the Integro implementation project down to 3 key areas to focus on in relation to employment. So the first was the recognition of qualifications and work experience gained outside of the UK. The second was addressing discrimination in the workplace. And the third was glass ceiling for ethnic minorities. The first step in this, like our other partners working within the ENAR framework, were the stakeholder exchange event with third country nationals to begin to design a framework for the implementation of the project. And then we had ENAR guidance and peer review as that developed. We ended up with the research report, Voices for Change, mapping integration reality for third country nationals in Northern Ireland and indicating their sense of belonging. Those 4 indicators that I mentioned earlier were arrived at through a 2011 Eurostat pilot and the Zaragoza Declaration. So the first Integro Roundtable event we carried out in a series of focus groups across Northern Ireland, and that was to ensure that there was wide geographical catchment and also that the different migrant voices across Northern Ireland were captured in that design. Our agreed implementation actions, which were to be carried out between February and April of this year, were 3 awareness-raising regional roadshow events that could be family-friendly, so to encourage wider participation. They would lead to a national policy seminar where we would distill the issues that had been explored within those workshops. And it would be followed up by mediation training that would focus on challenging racism and promoting rights in the workplace. These concrete activities would be supported by ongoing outreach sessions with harder to reach communities. So we were finding it difficult in the early stage of the Integro project to include the local communities. So we found opportunities to go out into the local communities and include people more fully in the design of the project. And also to attract employers who their voice was key to the success of the project. So just to remind you of the aims again then, before I report back on the outcomes of the project. They were to raise awareness with the statutory and non-statutory organisations, looking at the institutional barriers to full participation, and they were to raise awareness with the employer and employee bodies. The first step was to identify the key stakeholders and make sure that they were fully involved in the implementation of the project. So we established a stakeholder advisory group that drew together the key cross-sectoral stakeholders that would be necessary to the success of our project. They included the Government Department for Employment and Learning, who are responsible for policy issues that were impacting directly on third country nationals. 2 trade unions with strong migrant worker representation, so the Irish Congress of Trade Unions and Unison Migrant Worker Projects. The Race Equality Unit at the OFM DFM, so that's our Northern Ireland Assembly, and they are the unit responsible for developing the ongoing development of the racial equality strategy. We also involved the Northern Ireland Strategic Migration Partnership, whose role it is to work with local authorities to promote equality of opportunity at a local level. And 3 of the local authorities that we involved in the project were the Derry City Council, tied to the Northwest Office, Belfast City Council with the main office at NICEM, and then the Newry and Mourne District Council. And finally, we involved a social partner who focused on employment and employability issues. So the implementation of the project, as I said, it took place between February and March, the first stage. This was the regional roadshow events that were designed really to bring together as many of the stakeholders as possible and identify practical solutions to the problems that we'd already evidenced through the Voices for Change mapping exercise in the latter part of 2014. So we held one of the roadshows in Derry, and it was focusing particularly on the glass ceiling for ethnic minorities. We had a total of 12 participants from third country national backgrounds, and we were able to involve local politicians. So we had an opening address from the Mayor of Derry City, a speaker from NICEM, and also an elected representative from Westminster. In Craigavon, we focused on working conditions, and that's where a lot of migrant workers who had arrived highly skilled were underemployed in low-skill manufacturing occupations. We ended up with a total of 38 participants at that session, and it was jointly facilitated by NICEM, but also had really strong trade union involvement in that workshop as well. Finally, in Belfast, we held our final session in the Indian Community Centre in order to involve the community as much as possible. We had recognition of qualifications and work experience as the theme there. We had a total of 42 participants, an opening address from the Lord Mayor of Belfast, and speakers from wider stakeholders, including NICEM, Volunteer Now, which is effectively a volunteer brokerage service, and an employer, Allstate NI, who are one of the larger employers of migrant workers in Northern Ireland. Like I said, we focused really on those workshops in identifying practical suggestions for change rather than rehash what we already knew. We were able to use those findings to distill our work into a focus on 2 policy issues to explore at a national level with all of the key stakeholders involved. That took place in March, and we had 29 people attend. We had a keynote speaker from the Equality Commission of Northern Ireland, and we also had the Department for Employment and Learning speak on the day. Those are 2 key stakeholders in driving any of the policy changes forward that we want to see through the Integro project, so it was vital to have them involved at that level. The seminar itself focused on 2 stages. So we had essentially the context for Integro on a Northern Ireland scale. So we focused employment and employability, a policy context. And then we used the recommendations from Voices for Change and also from some forthcoming research that we have done into English for speakers of other languages to set a context for change. So we were bringing the stakeholders together, providing practical ways forward for discussion. We weren't asking for more suggestions for change. We were presenting the suggestions that we already had, worked through a wide variety of stakeholders and saying, well, look, how can we begin to actually affect some of this change now that we have the key stakeholders here? So you can see that the 2 issues that we really focused in on were the role of the Department for Employment and Learning and the Equality Commission in working together to influence employers to recognise those qualifications gained outside of the UK, and also to look at the ESOL English language provision and how that could be designated potentially as an essential skill, as it is in the rest of the UK. So currently Northern Ireland is the only place where third country nationals would have to pay to access the ESOL courses. We also were asking the question more widely what the government can do to address discrimination in the workplace, with a particular focus on glass ceiling for ethnic minorities. And how can we look at training more generally, both to migrant workers and to employers, in order to address some of those discrimination issues. Following that, we had our mediation training. The training was delivered specifically for third country nationals, and it was delivered in partnership with the trade unions. So it delivered over 2 days. We were able to engage 19 third country nationals from across Northern Ireland on a very practical training that was looking at challenging racism and promoting rights in the workplace. Outreach and dissemination activities continued beyond that, and we were able to reach a further 112 stakeholders from a variety of civil society, local community organisations, employers, one-to-one follow-up with government agencies that we needed to get some movement on the issues now that we had completed the implementation stage. So relating this back to the outcomes of the project as initially suggested, outcome 1 were that we would have at least 20 third country nationals and employer bodies from public and private sector having accessed leadership training and development opportunities that take a rights-based approach to challenge workplace discrimination. We had, in total, we had reached over 140 people through the implementation stage, just of the regional roadshows, but then we were able to distill that even further into the 19 places on the specific 2-day training on challenging racism. And since then, we've been able to provide opportunities for people to use that knowledge. So there were questions asked specifically on employment issues to candidates for the Westminster parliamentary elections last month on employment issues. We were able to provide a platform at the All-Party Group for Ethnic Minorities, for which NICEM acts as a secretariat, where the findings for Voices for Change could be discussed in detail. Our second outcome was improved awareness of the Integro project across the national area and within the wider community through the regional office events. We were aiming for a minimum of 120 people reached through those events. In total, by the end of the implementation stage, we had involved 381 participants in the events, so that was a successful outcome. Our third outcome was to look at existing projects and community-led activities and how they could be expanded by our involvement in the Integro project. For us, this was key to activating some of our recent action research, which had focused on the childcare, the barriers to accessing childcare, the economic downturn in the Northwest, and also the multiple discrimination faced by women from an ethnic minority background in our shadow report to CEDAW. So it was fully integrated in the work of Integro and actually gave an impetus to people who had been involved as stakeholders from migrant worker communities on the different projects to keep carrying the momentum forward and to continue to lobby at a policy level. Our fourth outcome was to look at how to encourage political engagement with the Integro project by inviting local members of elected authorities to roadshow events and the closing policy seminar. In total, we were able to involve 4 political representatives throughout the lifetime of the project. We had the deputy mayors of Belfast City and Derry City Council at the regional roadshow events to give a keynote address. We had Anna Lowe, who's a MLA and chair of the All-Party Group for Ethnic Minorities at the time, to deliver the keynote speech for our second roundtable event. And we had a local MP, Mark Durkin, attend one of our regional roadshows. Our fifth outcome was to build a strong regionalised evidence base on employment and employability needs with recommendations that will inform regional events and the national policy seminar. In our Voices for Change report, and through the way that we had designed our first roundtable event by having the focus groups in each area, we were able to build a very strong regionalised profile. That means the individual regional offices can continue to lobby on employment issues at a local level, where it's tied into the national work of Integro and also has the wider European platform. The first roundtable event had 42 participants in it, and that then expanded as we moved towards the second roundtable. We had a total of 85 participants, so we could see some real growth there within the short 6-month period. Our sixth outcome was that a minimum of 120 participants are better informed. By the end of the implementation stage, we'd had 140 of those, and as I'd mentioned, 19 of them specifically went on to work as community activists and representatives of community-led organisations to take on that mediation training. The seventh outcome was that 4 key employability issues are identified to take forward from regional events to a national policy seminar. We decided to distill that even further down to the 2 events that we could see some real opportunity for change at a policy level on. So they were subsumed within the lobbying to have ESOL recognised or designated as an essential skill in Northern Ireland, as it is in the rest of the UK, and also to look at the National Academic Recognition Information Centre and how that could be. There's some of the issues with that. So currently that's used as a way of qualifications from outside of the UK being recognised and given their equivalency in order to support employers to recognise the skills that their migrant workforce have. There are a number of issues with that that we were able to recognise through the Integro project. Quite often, NARIC doesn't give the recognition at the level that it should be, or the perception that it should be recognised at. And also, it operates on quite a small scale at the moment, so the access point are the jobs and benefits offices within Northern Ireland, but it's currently only available at 9 of those jobs and benefits offices, so it's actually operating on quite a small scale, and there's still a real lack of awareness amongst both the migrant population, employers, and wider stakeholders of the existence of the NARIC Centre. The 8th outcome was that we were aiming for 120 people to be involved in the national seminar, where in fact we had 29. For us, ultimately this wasn't seen as a weakness of the project because all of the implementation activities had involved wider stakeholders throughout both the design and the implementation of the project, and also the participation. They'd also taken place within a very short time frame of just over 5 weeks. So we felt that the engagement with the wider stakeholders had been fully met. And finally, the publicity and media campaign, we were aiming for 2,000 leaflets or postcards to be printed and distributed, focusing on at least 2 of the specific employment issues. In the end, we decided to focus on 3 of the issues, and we had designed the leaflets to focus on each of the regional events, although they were widely available, and they linked directly to helpful research, but also to case studies that were developed through a photography project that aimed to tell the real stories of migrant workers who came to Northern Ireland. So there was a human aspect to the policy work that we were doing through Integro, and also then we decided to create the postcard, which you'll find down the back on the information table there, that we can use as almost like a legacy, to link to the legacy of Integro through the overall project website. It also links to the Northern Ireland research. So just to wrap up, and before we can hopefully have a little bit of discussion about the project, when looking at some of the challenges that we faced specific to the Northern Ireland Integro project, for us the political climate is incredibly difficult. As I said, there are no national strategies on integration, on sexual orientation, on gender. It means that multiple discrimination areas are not being addressed in an effective way. Funding for NGOs like NICEM is extremely difficult at the moment. A lot of our policy work and community development work was funded through Atlantic Philanthropies, which finished last year. So at the moment, there's a lot of project-led work that we're trying to mainstream and trying to make sure that threads of one project are supported and picked up by the next. Accessing employer associations and private sector employers was an issue for us throughout the project. Actually, since the implementation stage, we've begun to see some developments in that area because we now have such momentum happening, and we have the involvement of key stakeholders who've delivered some of the implementation areas. So, for example, at the National Policy Seminar, where we had the Department for Employment and Learning and the Equality Commission, that's given us an inroad in some ways to some of the employers who wouldn't necessarily have been so keen to engage before. And we're very keen to promote best practice employers in order to work from the global level employers to the smaller scale. So in the last month, I've met with 3 employers of different sizes to look at how the work that we've done through the Integro project can benefit them, and have been trying to build a business case for the Integro findings. We operate in Northern Ireland without any clear monitoring data, and in fact, even in the draft racial equality strategy, that wasn't built in to support any indicators for improvements, which is a major issue for us. And finally, we have no national contact point for integration in the UK, so it's difficult to progress some of these issues in a way that might be more clear in some of the other European countries. With the successes of this particular project, we were able to target our focus on key employment themes because of the grassroots involvement throughout the work, and also the fact that it was embedded within the Voices for Change report, so the action research approach. That also, it not only promoted engagement more widely, but it also gave ownership to the third country nationals and the wider migrant communities who both co-designed and also helped to implement the project. We had a wide stakeholder base, as you saw through the stakeholder advisory group involvement. And some of those organisations, for example, the trade unions, played a key role in the delivery in partnership of the implementation activities. So the trade unions, through working in partnership with us on the mediation training, for example, and also the delivery of one of the regional roadshows. And that helped strike a balance. We were very keen to strike a balance between the social partner involvement, but also the involvement of the community-led initiatives that were ethnic minority-led, so that the ownership truly does remain with the community members. As I said, we continue to work with the Department for Employment and Learning and the Equality Commission, and they're very willing to progress some of the issues and link us more effectively with employers. And we now hope to see the momentum from this Integro project continue into an Integro forum, which will link the community members and the community activists with the wider stakeholders that we need to continue to lobby on change, particularly in and around the recognition of ESOL as an essential skill, and to look at the effectiveness of NARIC in recognising qualifications and work experience. So with that, I'd like to invite anybody to, if they have any questions on the implementation of the project, you're very welcome to fire away. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, hello? Hello? It's on? Okay. So I'm Hillary from Berlin, and I am just wondering to what degree you're able to differentiate the discrimination that happens in general in the labor market for people who might be UK citizens but are visible minorities and also women. Is that...
I think there are two points that brings to mind. I mean, one is then the value of having the trade unions as the social one of the social partners, because they're representing the wider workforce. But the particular trade union representatives that we have are involved in the migrant worker support units. So they can bring their expertise of discrimination more generally and make those connections more helpfully for us, but also they can encourage then that wider stakeholder participation or wider stakeholder voice of the local community and the discrimination that's faced by them. With regards to the differential and multiple discrimination faced by women from ethnic minority backgrounds, one of our beneficiaries of this project was the Black and Minority Ethnic Women's Network. So their voice was key in all of the regional roadshows and also the national policy seminar. And again, all of these issues are cross-cutting. So, I mean, the fact that we don't have a gender equality strategy has the knock-on implication for the racial equality strategy as well. And the Integro project was very helpful in mobilising all community members in and around a key barrier to integration, which is employment. And also to highlight some of those multiple discrimination areas that would particularly affect women. Martin?
Yeah, Martin, also from Berlin. You produce a lot of knowledge within NISAM now on work discrimination. Do you see a chance that employees might contract you for the knowledge that you gathered and the contacts and the stakeholders to say, look guys, we see we have a problem here, we don't know how to handle it, like could you provide a service? Like could you turn this into business?
I think
to sustain what you're doing, because funding is off now, of course.
Yeah, I mean it's a very interesting potential route to explore is the social economy model, because as I'd said, the funding situation is very difficult, and it can be particularly difficult to attract funding for policy work. So I mean that could be a useful avenue to explore. I think it will be valuable once the Integro Forum is set up, and again, we're looking towards how to continue developing the work along those lines. Is there a way then, to usefully support employers to look at the needs of their migrant workforce? To an extent, with the follow-up work that we've done with the Equality Commission, they were keen for us to add input to their training for employers through the Integra research in a very basic way to begin with, but simply to make employers aware that the NARIC system exists, and that will also support the Department for Employment and Learning, to create awareness around that and also to support employers. I guess to date we've seen how this knowledge can support existing organisations, but it might be actually an interesting avenue to explore as to how it can support us and kind of help us to be more resilient with the funding cuts to the sector.
Any other quick question, please? To Mark? We will have time later in the afternoon after we hear about the other pilot projects for discussion. So, if no other question, Mark, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And we can now have a 20-minute coffee break. Thank you very much.